suggestions on fine-tuning our policy that is outside of her field of work. But she did make the recommendation that we look at Boulder County's policy, so I printed copies to help facilitate seeing how theirs is different than ours. There we go, I'm not just having the whole, right, keep one for each of us. Thank you. I think as far as ADA policy regarding wheelchairs, I do want to make sure that we all are aware. Paragraph 3 of the city's current OPDMDS policy says this policy applies only to OPDMD, not wheelchair usage. So in accordance with federal law, wheelchairs, including mobility scooters and manually powered mobility aids, such as walkers, crutches, canes, braces, and other similar devices, are permitted anywhere in the city where pedestrian travel is allowed. So,
does that include motorized wheelchairs?
Wheelchair, yes. So, yes, exactly. What's nice about how Boulder frames that is it teases it apart. In ours, it's paragraph 3 in an OPDMDS policy rather than a standalone statement regarding the federal obligations for wheelchair access. So that was one of the bigger things that she suggested that we tease apart and state separately, or at least make it available. A basic edit in there is where public pedestrian travel, so that would be an enhancement. So the other thing that she made the suggestion for clarity is, as we continue our evaluation of our parks, open space, and trail amenities, that our OPDMDS policy list where they are allowed and where they are not allowed for clarification in our list. Because currently when we list only where they are allowed, Boulder County goes further and explains where all OPDMDS are allowed, where all OPDMDS are prohibited, except e-bikes where that's been appropriate for their trail systems. Then listing where all OPDMDs are prohibited, and then the restriction of the 4-foot width. So coming out of our discussion with her, we are moving in the right direction as far as pursuing amendment requests to the conservation easements. As we roll forward in reviewing our current policy, I think not only including Twin Buttes, as we talked about the last time I was at our meeting, but going further and describing where they're allowed, where they're prohibited, and teasing apart wheelchairs specifically for the federal ADA compliance that is not specific to OPDMDS was advised. With counsel that has more ADA and OPDMDS specific experience in and is in the wheelhouse.
I guess the one general comment I'd make is, as a rule, I think we should try to invite everybody who's able to enjoy the natural lands that the city's been able to acquire on behalf of its community. And I don't want the bar to be, let's try to barely meet the threat of, or the limit of some federal ADA law obligation. It's like, how do we encourage anybody with a physical disability of any nature to allow them to go out and enjoy the natural lands we've acquired on their tax dollars? Thank you very much. And to me, it's like, that should be where we should be striving. It's like, let's invite people to enjoy and recreate our outdoors as much as we can. And shouldn't be, what can we do that'll barely satisfy some federal obligation? No. It should be, what is in the best interest of our community, and how do we invite people to enjoy that in a way that doesn't invite danger and harm into our environment? That's the goal, which might be a whole 2 steps above ADA compliance. And I don't think that's where we should be focusing too much attention. It's like, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to invite our community to enjoy and recreate and maintain their health and improve their quality of life by enjoying their natural lands. That's a different goal than, does an OPDMD requirement say that a wheelchair is allowed on a trail that's 4 feet wide? Let's not get too bound up in that. It seems like the goal is misstated.
Any questions or other comments? Did the attorney that you spoke with, did they provide a formal opinion letter? Or was it just communications?
Communication,
We just literally got
yes.
an engagement letter last week and started engaging with her and started having discussions. We're still working through quite a bit, and Amy and I even talked about it today, whether we should get an official opinion letter. We can definitely pursue that. So yeah.
I mean, obviously,
And if I may,
Staff's
her
discretion
direction
in that.
was that we pursue that with La Plata Open Space Conservancy, who's the holder of the conservation easement.
yeah, I
So
understand
that's
that.
what we
yeah.
have to hash out, is where we're going for that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to suss out exactly what the recommendation was, and I think it would probably behoove staff as well as the city to have something they could lean on rather than saying we had conversations early on. Obviously not my decision, but it would seem to make sense to have a formal opinion letter that you could refer back to in navigating these topics, particularly because there's been so much, I think, fanfare around this particular topic, and we've had a lot of comments regarding restricted access, that sort of stuff. That may just be the lawyer in me speaking, but it would seem to make sense. So if that is ever available, please do forward that on to our office, or not our office, here. I just got out of the office. I'm trying to stay out of this board.
It's okay.
Anthony, Tom here real quickly. Can I just make sure that we all understand this? This is kind of a confusing thing for me, and I understand Amy's point on replicating some of the more detailed explanations that Boulder County evidently, or maybe the city of Boulder, goes to. Both of those sounded like good improvements to be much more clear. But is it fair to say, Amy, that the OPDMD policy that we have written right now and that you're going to get a written opinion on does fully comply? Let me just say that fully complies both with our intent as a city and federal law as it relates to disabled access. I thought Seth was making the point that we were potentially out of sync, or even like legally not on good ground relative to federal mandates here. And I think you're saying just the opposite, aren't you? The attorney said we are correct, we're fine, we're solid, and Seth's only point is that we might want to go further than what is the minimum required. But can you comment on that? Am I saying that correctly?
No, yeah, that's great. Jessica's, her expertise is conservation easement law, not ADA compliance law. So she read through it, she's read a number of these. Nothing stood out to her as being in error, but she told me she's not going to put in writing, if we want an ADA attorney specifically, we need to find somebody that's going to do that. So that's something that we can choose to do. But having been reviewed by our city attorney and now a conservation easement attorney, neither of them saw this policy as being sorely out of line with what it needs to be. She's reviewed a number of them for other communities because of the exact same question, and she said ours very much aligns. So if we need to take it to the next step, she is not the attorney for federal ADA law. She is a conservation easement attorney.
And when we do go through the conservation easement amendment process, is that an opportunity to clarify and maybe expand our OPDMD policy at that point, as long as we're going in and making changes to certain easements?
Absolutely. So yes, obviously once, if approved, actually, thank you, Tom. We haven't prepared the formal request because we're still working with the consultants to do the current conditions report. They are working on that. Obviously snow is making it tough to get out on the ground, but they've done a lot of the desk study, and I'm checking in with them next week. But how we decide after we get that report, we are requesting the amendment. We can absolutely say, do we want an amended conservation easement to call out Class 1 e-bikes for OPDMDS? We have that opportunity when we go into a formal request. Or are we making the blanket request that language allow for e-bikes? The conservation easement, if approved, we wouldn't have to specify the e-bikes as OPDMDS. It can be a request that says general use. The conservation easement doesn't have to define them as OPD. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, that does. So does that mean that Parks and Recreation Advisory Board's role is to debate whether or not we want to include these Class 1 e-bikes in our OPDMDS policy and make that recommendation to council, so that when you are in these negotiations, you head that way and you try to secure that with open space? Do you want a policy debate and a recommendation to City Council?
I think our thought process is we would get this information, we would develop a draft amendment request, bring that to you and talk through it and get your input and thoughts. And then either redraft, or if you all are good with it, submit it to LPOSC. Now,
Okay, and
that
the
brings up.
redraft is the clarity points that Amy brought up, that redraft?
Talking two different things, I think. The
Right.
OPDMDS policy, if, kind of coming out of our last conversation about it, if we want to start revising it now so that it can incorporate Twin Buttes immediately, that's one task. And then as we develop our request for conservation easement amendment, then that will be a separate document. And we determine, are we asking LPUSC to amend in the name of an OPDMDS policy, or do we want it to be a general? Does that make sense, Tom? So we kind of have two
Yep.
different documents we're working toward right now.
Sounds like there's actually a third, because you mentioned a couple points of clarification that are in the Boulder policy that aren't in ours. Does that require city council discussion and approval, or can we rewrite the policy to make it clear, where they're allowed, where it's not allowed, and the other thing you mentioned?
I think, yeah, that would go into the revision of the policy. So
Okay.
in my mind, those are the points and why it would drive revising the
Okay.
policy right now.
All right, well, those sound like good ideas, and I think we should probably ask staff to come back with that OPDMDS policy rewrite and have that discussion to see if we can recommend that to city council, so you're prepared to have that discussion with La Plata Open Space when we get to that stage.
Yes,
Sounds like,
yes.
Kim, can I ask you a question? Has this policy actually been approved by council, or is it just a Parks and Rec policy?
I don't know.
It's an administrative policy. It was not taken to a vote.
So it's not gone through any kind of city council review and approval?
I don't remember it
I don't think
doing
it
so.
has.
It was not, no, it's an administrative, and so the board saw it at 3 different board meetings, the Parks and Rec Board, all the different draft versions and suggestions from the board were taken into account during the drafting process. The Natural Lands Board also saw it. So for the several months that we had a working draft, it came to this board for review with the council liaison. But it's my understanding it was an administrative policy not requiring a vote. But it did involve both boards with council liaison as it was developed.
I'd be curious, does this board think it should be a council-approved policy, or is it something we think Parks and Rec is qualified and adequate to run a policy that's reflective of what the city's goals and its objectives are, and yet it wasn't written or approved by council, it was written by Parks and Rec? I mean, it's okay. I mean, just curious whether we think it should be a council-led policy.
I will say we do implement and have a lot of policies within the Parks and Recreation Department that if we started taking everything to city council, there would be a lot.
This is a little different. This is recreation on our open space, which is a pretty big deal. It's a pretty big deal, I think. So I'm just asking, I don't know if Jerry, if you have an opinion there, Ken, but it is something that comes to my mind, whether it's something that deserves council level involvement. And if it doesn't, so be it. I'm just curious.
I think that's a really tough question, because I think that departments need to have latitude in what they do. That's their job, that's why they're hired, that's why they do what they do. I think when there are issues that the community doesn't like and they want things to be different, they have the opportunity to come to council, and council then directs staff to do something about that. That happens all the time. I can think of like a million different policies that might have been, for instance, who gets the right of way on the trails? Horses, hikers, or bikers. That never came to council. So I think that we're kind of like going, well, at what level does council get involved unless there's a problem, if you will? So I understand what you're saying, but I also can see the logistical aspect of it, as well as the department's responsibilities. And that also comes about, do you keep your job? When you do your goals and objectives and you're being evaluated, have you been doing what's right for the community and the community appreciates it? There's all those kind of things tied in there. So.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know if the city council should be voting on it or not. But pretty soon, we might not have any say in it either way, so.
Fair enough.
You'll always have say. There will always be a way to have your voice heard, no matter what the structure is.
Okay.
I think we're venturing a little bit off topic, but I think in regards to Seth's question, you know, Seth, I hear that you could potentially form that into a motion to make a recommendation for city council to examine the OPD policy, or have us look at it and examine it and make a recommendation to it. But other than that, I think it's kind of a dead topic.
I mean, it seems like staff is trying to optimize and adjust policies to be responsive to what I think is a weakness in the policy that exists. I'd say let that process mature. That's my opinion.
Good. Any other comments on this topic? All right, thank you, Amy. We appreciate you coming here and giving us your time.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, Amy.
We will move on to item 6.1, which is strategic planning update and discussion. Scott, what do you got for us?
Sure, I'll kick that off. We had a meeting with the chairs and vice chairs of both this board, so Tom and Anthony, and then the chair and vice chair of the Natural Lands Preservation Advisory Board, Emma Millar and Michael Watchman. We had a really good discussion about strategic plan and how we want to go about developing that. There were two questions, or at least one question, and Tom or Anthony, if you have a different recollection, but the one question I know we asked or wanted to bring back to each of the boards and talk about were, well, let me kind of back up. So when we started about looking at not only the city's strategic plan, we also looked at the 2021 strategic plan for the Parks and Recreation Department. We started looking at the differences between those two plans. The number one glaring difference that came out of it were performance metrics. There are performance metrics within the city's strategic plan, but we didn't really have any within the departmental strategic plan. So one of the questions I know we wanted to ask this board was, as well as NLPAB, is are there specific performance metrics that this board thinks we should be tracking and reporting out on an annual basis? The other thing we wanted to ask the board, so that's question one. The other thing that we wanted to ask both boards is, as you look at the kind of the groupings of goals within the both strategic plans, they don't really kind of line out. So we have our overall city goals with all of the action items and performance metrics under those. Do we want to kind of change what's within the goals in the Parks and Rec department's strategic plan to mirror that, and what would they be? So those were kind of the two questions we wanted to ask both boards. Did that capture that correctly, Tom, Anthony?
Yep, yeah, that's well said, Terry. That's exactly what we discussed, and that was the follow-up, yes.
Yep.
And was there something material there that you're like, here's one or two that are just juicy and interesting versus, you know, mid-distribute? I mean, just I'm kind of curious because I've read them both, but off the top of my head, I can't identify the disconcerting kind of elements. I can't say, oh, I know what they're talking about, and it doesn't jump.
Yeah, I'm not looking at the policies directly like we were when we were in that meeting. But I think that the primary things that I was noticing was, hey, there's a few things where we're talking about kind of apples to oranges, and then there's a lot of things that are apples to apples in terms of what we're trying to accomplish, what sort of things are important, what sort of things are important to represent to our community about what we're doing with their tax dollars. How do we quantify that? How do we provide some sort of reliable data in order to bolster the job that the city's doing for its use of the taxes that are being raised, right? And so there was just a few, I think, boxes that kind of got blurred because there seemed to be within our own policy kind of a neglect to certain other things, whether or not they were not actually touching on some of the city's or I guess there wasn't maybe a recognition that they were touching on some of the city's policy reviews or their boxes of analyses. And so just matching those up, I think there was some delineation between those two and some differences of how to go about that. And so I think in general, we wanted to see, you know, what sort of things should we be examining within our purview? And do we want to adjust those to maybe be more relevant to city council or to the city and to their general goals? That was really kind of the thrust of it, and we wanted to get a greater opinion of that from all of the groups, but that was somewhat of the discussions that we were having. Tom, do you have anything in addition to that?
No, that's my memory. I'm sorry, I don't want to repeat what you said, but that's exactly right, Anthony. I'll just confirm that.
Fair enough, thanks.
What was the question specifically you wanted us to answer?
Really two questions, so maybe it's, and I think we were just wanting to have this conversation with you all tonight to kind of propose, hey, these are two questions we want to delve into in each board. So maybe it's talking about it a little bit tonight, going back and thinking about it, looking at both plans, and then coming back next month and having a little bit more, hey, these are some suggestions that the board members are making. And then we'll get back together with the NLPAB. The question number one, just kind of more higher level, was looking at the city's strategic plan. How does that flow, or how should it appropriately flow down into the department's strategic plan? Because right now we have 4 strategic initiatives within Parks and Rec. They don't necessarily match those
Like 7 or 8.
7 and 8 initiatives up in the city strategic plan. So taking a look at that, making sure that we're appropriately flowing down the cities, where the city wants to go, making sure that we're supporting that in developing our strategic initiatives or our goals around that. The second item is we want to maybe have a conversation about inserting performance metrics into the departmental strategic plan. And those are things like tracking, maybe visitation here at the rec center, Lake Night Horse, those sorts of things, what our trail usage counts are, and really kind of getting a good idea of what you all think as community members would be good things to be tracking.
Where would that fit in with the strategic plan exactly?
So
Tracking
yeah, so we would,
visitations.
once we get all those performance metrics, we put that into the strategic plan, saying this is what we are going to be measuring throughout the year. And at the end of the year, we compile it all, we present it, we talk about it, and yeah, so we just start looking at that. We have a lot, but I want to make sure that we're tracking what you want as a community and things like that.
It's one way to make sure that, or to know whether or not you're meeting or exceeding or not achieving the goals of the strategy that you're designing, right? So it's one way of measuring and knowing, not just anecdotally or because emotionally that's how people feel, but have some actual data around it.
Right.
Yeah, we discussed that kind of at length, that Parks and Rec naturally falls into this world of qualitative metrics where, hey, I'm having fun, or I really love doing this thing, or I don't like doing this thing. That doesn't really tell you from a quantitative and reliable perspective what sort of value it's providing. And you can relate that to, I think, directly to the city's strategic plan boxes and match those a little bit better so that we have kind of this uniform examination of what exactly Parks and Rec is providing, what sort of things natural lands are providing, and how is that really quantified, and how is it exemplar of what we're trying to achieve. So it provides maybe a little bit more backbone as opposed to a narrative of these things are beneficial to the community. So that's really kind of where it came down, or was maybe derived from. We were having extensive conversations about that, but it's a hard thing because we deal with squishy discussions all the time. We're a large portion of our board is receiving feedback from community members about these topics, and so how can we go and say, well, actually we've been doing this. This is how many trail users we have. This is how many people are visiting the pool. These are stats. This is what we're providing to the community, and this is how it matches up and is reflected in generally the city's overall strategic plan.
I will say, if there are some squishy measurements you want,
Right, for sure.
put them out there, because we could take some of those performance indicators over to our library department. They're master researchers. That's what they do. They might be able to help us figure out ways to quantify that squishy thing you want. So there's people study happiness. we can measure happiness to a certain level, so.
And another resource we may want to consider is Fort Lewis College, and Turi has been in touch with the business school and several professors who study the measuring of this, and we're actually doing a lot of that in the slide with respect study as well. One of the professors involved makes 6 figures a week going out to places like Ford and doing data analytics for them, so we've got a great resource there we could tap into.
Thank you.
Hey, Terry, Tom here. This is an important topic, but it's a little complicated, especially if you're hearing it as a board member, maybe for the first time. I'm wondering, is it too much to ask our staff team in the next board packet for March to put together like the comparison between our the city's 4 primary goals and our 8, so they're side by side, and asking board members to prepare for the meeting by looking at those and really thinking about whether or not ours could be called back or how could they pull together and mesh together. And same thing with the performance metrics, rather than just sort of guess and have lots of different options out there, could we give a list of possible qualitative and quantitative and have people rank them in order of maybe benefit to our decision-making process, so that we start to narrow down the board members' work and don't have them all over the map and then have a random conversation. I just think this is hard stuff when you're talking strategy and then tactics and metrics, and I just think the board would benefit if we narrowed it down and gave options to think about rather than everybody kind of in their own space.
Yeah, we can certainly do that, and actually I think it would behoove us to try and get some of that information out to you all earlier than later, so you have time to think about it instead of in the packet and having the weekend. So we'll try and get that out, something prepared.
Even earlier would be better. I just thought you'd need a little time on that, but I think that would narrow down our conversation, and we'd be on the same wavelength of debate rather than all over the map, which often happens in strategy.
Yep, and I definitely don't, we could put some of that out there, but I definitely don't want to squash any creative ideas either, so.
Right. You can leave it open and put the big other or miscellaneous or other thoughts, for sure. Be great to get that, in a couple weeks, and have a couple weeks to look at it and think about for March's meeting.
Yep.
Any questions, comments about that?
Just one thought crossed my mind, and it's just related to this, but if you get rejected, you want to take your kid to swim lessons, and you can't get a swim lesson, it's irritating, it's really frustrating, and it causes a fair amount of dis-ease. And there's situations like that, mostly in the managed recreational sphere. Now, can you do that same thing, saying you are not allowed in getting to a trail? No, that doesn't really exist. It may be complicated, it may get challenging, but there's usually, you can't, you're not allowed in, you're not authorized. But that, can't get in game time or can't get in something, it causes frustration and anxiety that can overwhelm 100 good experiences, because that's just the way we're wired as human beings. Don't know how to do it, but that's to avoid or minimize negative perceptions is probably more valuable than improving good perceptions in a sick, twisted way, but the way the metrics would run. So just crossed my mind. I was just gnashing on this, so I'll stop now.
No, I mean, I think that's a good point. When you're examining what you're doing, you obviously have to take the good with the bad. And so figuring out how to do that, those are absolutely welcome topics that I think you should float in response to this kind of homework assignment. But that's, I think, access in general, whether or not you're talking about getting a kid into swim lessons or gymnastics, or being able to get to a certain place on the river trail, something like that. Like, all of that stuff, I think, would be informative and beneficial. I mean, kind of leads right into our next topic of parks inventory and future needs assessment, right? Like, that's the whole point of that report, is to examine what sort of tools we can take from that, what sort of things we can utilize and improve upon. So I think absolutely those are the things and the thoughts that we're looking for from people.
fair enough, just wanted to throw it out there.
Oh, I do have to just add a positive thing though. The recreation staff came up with a plan for gymnastics and swim lessons. So you can, for the, register the first Friday of the month for the following. So that when we open our registration on the 23rd of this month, they don't just fill them all up. So they're working it.
Kind of,
they're
yeah,
trying.
leveling it
I
out
just
as
wanted
best
to
you
add
can.
that
Yeah,
in.
no,
We're-
you do what you can, right?
Yeah, they're doing a good job.
I don't think that was directed as a fault or.
No,
Yeah,
no,
no,
I
it's
didn't
just-
even
it's
take
you,
it that
yeah,
way.
yeah.
I just thought, oh. that could
We're
be-
doing something in there, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I didn't take it that way.
Yeah, the first question that you had for us, Turi, was a little bit vague and abstract for me to give you an answer. I don't wanna pretend like I'm ignoring you, but I just don't know how to answer that. But the second question, you know, you were talking about how we could incorporate data such as like usage and visitation statistics into our strategic plan. And I do think that usage and visitation stats are important to understand things such as inclusivity. You know, that word inclusivity is used in our strategic plan. So I think that data is helpful to understand how inclusive we are being, even though sometimes it's out of our, you know, sometimes it's up to the people to decide if they want to participate at all in parks and recreation activities.
But yeah, I mean, to your point, different gender, different age, different race, it's like, does everybody enjoy this, or is it kind of hands-off, one group versus another, either culturally or otherwise? It's like, those are the things to work on,
Yeah.
you know.
I think to your point, Adam, that I would also encourage you not to just look at visitations, but move up to a higher vision of what is it we're trying to achieve here?
Right.
Is it a healthy community? What is it? And how might you measure that impact? You know, I don't know, I don't have the answer to that, but what is it that you're trying to achieve there? So inclusivity is one of them. Diversity of use is another, you know, it's that, do we have a healthier community because of what the Parks and Rec Department brings? Those kind of, so if you can also bring, because just the number of visitations,
Right.
and that increases, great, okay, maybe you're making more money or there's more people coming, but maybe our population has actually increased exponentially and you're not at the same percentage as your population anymore. So
Right.
those numbers don't mean anything by themselves. They mean something because of the impact that's occurring because of them.
And that was really kind of that first question that we were getting at, because we were noticing that some of those evaluative or maybe important boxes that that Parks and Rec is using don't necessarily match up with the sum total or all of that, and that's fine. I don't think that it needs to match all of the city's strategic goals or those boxes that they use, but there were some things that weren't even really kind of on our radar, like one thing that came to mind was just community involvement. How do parks play into that, such as, I mean, we have an ongoing concert series at Buckley Park every week, right? That's a community event. How does that register in our evaluation of what Parks and Rec provide to the community? So there's all sorts of things, and I think that that's the big question, and then the small detail question, they go hand in hand. So how do you measure the things that we should be measuring, and what should we be measuring? That's definitely a lot to ponder. So I think take that home with you guys once that information gets to you, review it, and just kind of examine. Actually, I could see Parks and Rec being kind of inviting to this particular topic. I could see this being important to this topic. How do we measure that? How do we show that? And then provide your reflections.
Right. The strategic plan seems to be this broad plan that looks at what's going on from, you know, 40,000 foot level or whatever, and then the data itself is really specific, and I don't know, I just don't know how to.
So, yeah, just to clarify, there is a kind of a step in between having those strategic initiatives or goals, and those are, you know, some things, steps, action items that we are gonna take. We'll discuss that too, but start taking that into account so that, and then once we have those identified, then we'll be measuring it, and if we're achieving those items.
Oh, right.
There was also one of the counselors brought up the concept of other than physical recreation. So are some people's recreation playing pinochle? And do we provide a space for people to come and play chess? Or do we, what about the mental activity that helps keep us healthy also? And are we like fencing ourselves in too much and not thinking a little bit more bigger? And what does recreation actually mean for all of our population, not just the physically active portions of the population?
I think it's a great topic. Up in Fruita, we actually, when we did our master plan in 2020, 2019, it was a parks, health, recreation, open space, and trails master plan. We wanted to make Frost. Yeah, we were starting to have some of those conversations, and we started looking at some of the community-wide statistics on substance abuse in youth, and how can Parks and Recreation be a preventative healthcare provider to lower some of those things. So we were starting to have some of those conversations. I'm excited that we're going to potentially open doors to some of that here too. So.
Yep. Any other comments? All right, we'll go to action item, or number 6.2 on our new business, Parks and Inventory and Future Needs Assessment. A couple subtopics on this, but Terry, I'll let you take it away.
So just utilization as a tool. I know we presented it to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board last month. Ron did a great job compiling that. We actually presented it to City Council last evening, and I think it was relatively well received.
More than relatively well. It was very well received. And just the idea that we're delving down into that so we can have a basis for what kind of maintenance dollars do we need to be spending, and how and where and how and when. Council was overjoyed.
So we have this report. So what do we do with the report? We've been kind of thinking about it and talking about it. There's really three ways that I think that we're going to be able to look at it, and that's when it comes to, well, operational budgeting is one thing. Taking a look at where we're spending our money. There's quite a few amenities that are highlighted that maybe need replaced in the coming years, such as updating or replacing wood chips in playgrounds. Those are things that we can take care of in our operational budget. So when we're developing our 2024 budget, we're going to make sure that we have enough of the resources within that budget to be able to take care of those smaller things. And then also when we get into the CIP process, that's where we want to make sure that we're taking a look at those larger items, playground replacements, and making sure that as we're not just adding new stuff, and we have been doing that actually in the past when we've been doing some trail renovations, and we've been adding those sorts of projects into the CIP plan. So we want to make sure that we kind of identify and look at those as well. And then the third thing is, how does this relate to future funding opportunities and things like that? And I know City Council and staff will be having some of those discussions next week. So I think that's how we're going to be taking this report and utilizing it. And then, Scott's department will take it and look at it and say, okay, in years 1 through 3, we need to really kind of take a look at these items and make sure that they're in operations or CIP or something like that, so that we can start addressing them. And then if we don't have enough funding, then we need to talk to the City Council about finding those appropriate levels of funding. So that's kind of how we envision utilizing it. So we just wanted to share that.
Right on. Hey Joanne, I was just noticing that David Moeller is listed as an attendee on the.
I think he's just listening on his phone, because I've tried a couple of times to
Okay.
include him, but it's on his side
Okay.
instead.
Okay.
But thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that he could chime in if needed. Wasn't sure if he was able or not.
Okay, any questions about the inventory and future needs assessment for Turi or for Councilor Baxter?
No, other than I just want to revisit that. I think one of the next steps you were planning to do is pursue, I'll call it the outdoor recreational universe, separate and distinct from the developed parks. Is that still true, or is that hopefully going to happen? What's the status?
Yeah, just to.
Or is it the buildings comes next? I don't know where you are in your headspace.
Just kind of clarifying that. So yes, this is our turf and tables parks. These are the 35 parks that we have within our community. So we do need to still, and we're talking about open space and natural lands, how are we gonna assess those areas and what's the appropriate way to do that? Our recreation facilities, and then our trail system. So we still have some areas that we need to get more information on. So,
Dury, Tom, will this change at all the sort of staff recommendations at the starting point on the CIP process? I just want to, it's such a great tool and such great knowledge that it's almost like we want a laminated sheet or something like that to look at once in a while. You know, that's probably a dumb idea. We don't need a laminated piece of paper, but it is good to have it handy and to think about it. You know, and when decisions come up, go back and say, where is that park again, and what's the status of it, and what grade did it receive? And certainly an active way for that would be to have the CIP process be, you know, hand in hand with this. And when we get staff recommendations, we make our own votes and ranking. We're really looking at that, even though this covers only parks, and obviously CIP goes well beyond that. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think it does go hand in hand with the CIP process and those discussions and where everything lines out. Especially this year, moving forward into future years, I think we'll have to have additional discussions about funding opportunities and what that means to taking care of what we got and what we want to accomplish new construction-wise in the future.
Okay, so I guess that was a yes, right?
Yes.
Yeah, good.
Yes, that was a yes.
Go.
All right, we'll move on to boards and commissions, possible reorganization, topic 6.3.
Sure, I'll just start off. You know, this conversation really started, I learned a lot back in fall of 2019. I know City Council at that time brought this subject up. I don't know how much it was looked at until early last year, but early last year it was re-brought up during the City Council budget retreat. And Council asked that we take a look at the boards and commissions, how they operate and how they're structured, and essentially kind of asked staff if we had a clean slate, how would we think of getting community input in the most efficient, cost-effective way, and maybe even just taking a look at how boards and commissions should be restructured. So really trying to lessen, we did some data collection on how much time departments were spending on boards and commissions, how much time City Council was spending on boards and commissions, kind of translating that into costs. So really taking a look at that and what's the impact on that, and how do we lessen or reduce those impacts and that burden.
Do you want the PowerPoint?
I think we're okay right now. So based on that, there is an interdepartmental cross-functional team is what we call it, that was created. It included people, Parks and Recreation, I was on it. Our Public Works Director participated here and there, but our Community Development Director was on it. Finance Director was on it. And just a variety of other folks. Our Strategic Planning and Budgeting Office was on it. Our City Clerk and things like that. So we had a lot of conversation. We went to City Council, I think, a little bit later after that request was made, talked to the City Council about it, kind of made one kind of sweeping, hey, this is one way we think about it. City Council then challenged us to delve a little bit deeper into it. And then we came up with a final recommendation, or a recommendation that was presented at the study session yesterday. Those recommendations, just so you know, included things like condensing 5 quasi-judicial boards into 2 boards, condensing 11 advisory boards into 6, going back to the original purpose of the Youth Advisory Council, changing the CRC and changing that into a more local or regional DEI board, creating a process for the community to have maybe a little bit more direct communication with directors in the city manager's office. So we talked about creating an every other month community meeting where all executive leadership team would be available to talk about any issues that come out or come up. Talked about library, CEC, the election police pension and firefighters pension board eventually phasing out when their purpose is no longer needed. And then one of the other things is with the dissolution of some of the advisory boards, creating a financial oversight board that would take the financial role from 2005, 2015, and the 2019 tax funds and provide city council with the recommendations. So that's what was kind of recommended yesterday. We're still, we've been directed to move forward with implementing that. We still have quite a bit of fine tuning and detail work to accomplish, but we'll be doing that, and the hope is to have this process kind of completed and in alignment with the May boards and commissions appointments. So that's where we're at. That's what we have been doing.
So just to clarify, I think that this, obviously the agenda was made prior to the directive that you received yesterday to move forward with that. So that's why it says possible reorganization.
Correct.
But the reorganization is very much going to be happening and being instigated by staff until May. When are applications going to open up for those?
I think those are some things that we'll have to fine tune, but I would anticipate the April timeframe. Applications will open up for the Financial Advisory Board, appointments made in May.
Okay. Any questions, comments?
Yeah, so
Well, I mean, the attached PowerPoint indicates then that this advisory board will be dissolved. Can we just state that or confirm that? Does that mean that PRAB in the next 2 or 3 months will be dissolved and these board members have the opportunity to serve on another area if they're selected, but this group goes away? Is that true?
So there would be 5 boards that would be dissolved and collapsed into the Financial Advisory Board. That's the Infrastructure Advisory Board, Parks and Rec Advisory Board, Natural Lands, Salt Fab, which is a finance board, and the Multimodal Advisory Board.
and what is an SOB again? That was mentioned in the
So that,
packet?
through our discussions, we were really trying to make sure, because we went out and talked to a lot of the boards, and we started talking about, yes, if we recommend the Financial Advisory Board, they could take care of recommendations regarding those funds. But we also wanted to still make sure that there was policy discussion or operational discussion. So we were kicking around the strategic and operations board, an advisory board, where some of those policy discussions could come up. We had further conversation. We eventually got to the point where, well, let's just try and streamline that community input and go directly with directors in the city manager's office hosting meetings and having those conversations.
And Terry and Kim, what's the timeline behind the change to the advisory boards that are being dissolved?
So we're looking, well, we have staff has another meeting based on the directive, I think the end of February. We'll hopefully be coming back to City Council in March with a little bit more defined implementation plan. But like I said, we're trying to align this with the board appointments in May.
Right. So we would have our March and April and maybe our May meeting, doing our good work for the next 3 months or so, and then this organization goes away in the plan, and board members can elect whether or not they want to re-engage in another manner, right?
Correct.
Okay. I'm not totally clear on what the strategic operations board is.
So that is not in the recommendation. That did not get in the final recommendation or presented to City Council yesterday. That was one of the discussion topics that we had within staff.
So it's just going to be the financial board, FOB,
FAB.
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 Right, so then, in the future, it's not totally clear on how the the people, the citizens are gonna be providing input to the city regarding parks and recreation, policy making in Durango?
So I think our vision is directors would be available at those, ELT meetings with the community. Policy questions could come up. We can answer them if it, rises to low, or maybe we need to take it to city council, we'll do that. You also still have a direct public comment piece at city council. And then the other thing is we wanted to really kind of be a little bit more project, CIP project oriented in our approach to doing a little bit more community meetings around that, as well as if we are having policy discussions, to have community meetings about specific policy discussions and decisions. So it's going to be a little bit more, instead of one group talking sometimes ongoing about a certain thing, we'll have individual project meetings or individual process or policy meetings. So that's how we're looking at it.
But ranking and decision on what projects happen when would fall primarily to staff to suss out, and then finance would evaluate whether or not they could fit it in and make recommendations on a given budget year.
There would be some sussing out, I would presume, in the financial advisory board. Staff would come to that board and say, these are our projects. These are the things that, based on, what's happening in multimodal, what's happening in public works, what's happening in parks and recreation, this is what we would recommend. They would talk about it, and then we would make a recommendation to city council.
Okay. That's a lot of boards that are gonna be dissolved.
Yeah, well, again, I'll bring a couple of comments forward. First of all, when I look at the resolution establishing this board, and I think it's comparable to all the other boards, there's, a mission statement says, hey, we council 20 years ago see the value in having an advisory board to provide us, I'll call it unfiltered kind of input from the community, so that we stay well informed and that it's going to advance the purpose of Parks and Recreation in this particular board's case. And then it goes on to list operational policy and guidance, and they're going to pay attention to parks, they're going to pay attention to all this stuff. Their last item, 9th of 9, thank you very much, is the one that says, and recommendations regarding spending on the dedicated tax. And what I see right now is council or staff is circling number 9, saying, that's the only reason you exist, and the rest of it's window dressing. We don't care anymore about 1 through 8 and the proclamations. That's inconsequential, that was window dressing. And it's offensive to me. It's simply, I've spent 7 years and God knows how many thousands of hours trying to become informed on this board and read God knows how many plans and such. And it is honestly really painful to say, it just doesn't matter, we don't give a shit. And it is offensive to me.
Well, there's that, and there's also a legal question of, whether or not this is within the intent of the voters when they approved the 2005 and 2015 parks and open space trails taxes for our community. I believe that those ballot initiatives or those ordinances as written mention that boards would be created in order to talk about how the money would be spent by from those taxes. So I think there's gonna be questions from the community, from the taxpayers, about how these boards can be dissolved when when the 2005 and 2015 post taxes were approved with the wording in there that boards would be assessing how the money would be spent on natural lands, parks, open space, and trails.
So I believe that the function of the Financial Advisory Board fulfills that requirement legally. That's my understanding. So I do want you also to know that council was not in alignment on this process. I believe, and I may be not characterizing it perfectly, but I believe Councilor Bosman's didn't want any change at all in this process. Councilor Buell, our Mayor Noseworthy, and Mayor Pro Tem Youssef supported the complete change as presented. I, on the other hand, was somewhere in the middle. And I've always felt that for the dedicated taxes, the 2005 and the 2015, that combining the three boards together would be better for the community and for how we spend the money and how it's effective. So that there's a conversation going on between all three of those entities and interests, rather than having three separate boards with all of that going on. And part of that has to do with staff time, part of it has to do with the number of people we have to appoint and all the work that you guys do. And just the conversations we were having earlier today about strategic plan development and all of that, that really needs to be all three of those boards, because essentially you're gonna do the same thing. The other thing was, I thought that the Infrastructure Advisory Board required specialized expertise and knowledge, because they're roads, utilities, waters, and sewer. And I really was concerned that how do you end up with a 7-person financial advisory board that incorporates all of those experiences and expertise that we're asking them to do, and be financial wizards about how things are spent and how things are funded. So I was suggesting that, there were two things I was suggesting. One was, what about combining boards versus dissolving boards? And maybe the chair and vice chair of those boards end up on the financial advisory board, so that you have that complete circle being made. And the other thing I was really concerned about is what I think we're all kind of concerned about. I said, I don't quite understand how on the ground the public input works. How does the public input get into this process? And I understand what staff has been saying about having meetings, and I totally support that, but I don't have enough grasp of what that structure actually looks like. And so I was hoping that we would have a better knowledge and foundation of that before, so I split it into two sections. One was all those boards that are really simple and make a lot of sense, like the electoral board. We don't need them because we don't do elections in person anymore, so they can go away. The ones that get absorbed into the city clerk's office, all those, okay, great, that's great. I totally support that. But this one is problematic for me. The Parks and Rec Board, the Multimodal Board, the Natural Lands Board, the IAB, and the Financial Advisory Board. So it wasn't, but in the way we work, the direction comes from the majority, not from, so that's the way it's going forward. Now, whether or not as you do more analysis, you all kind of tweak it in a different manner, I don't know. But
is there a way, in your estimation, that this board can provide input or comment, or?
you mean to the direction that's been given?
Yeah, or just trying to figure out how this board.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like direction has been given, the decision has been made. It's not really our decision to be making. I think that I would be willing to bet that every single one of us around the table sees some flawed logic in the decision that has been made, but at the same time, we are appointed by city council and serve at the will of city council. So it's, I don't know if we can really get in the business of saying, hey, you're wrong, do it differently. It's not our perspective. I think the thing that I struggle with is, I really struggle with the public input aspect of things, because I don't know how, Turi, you're going to sit there and act or have enough hours in the day to respond to every single public input, or to make an appropriate landing strip for the public in any sort of given topic. I look at, and I would worry and be very concerned about how does the public weigh in on what projects get done, when things move up, becomes of greater importance, and then that basically landing on just staff to make a determination of. I think that's about half of what we do on any given year, is listen to the interests of the community, the dynamic interests of the community that change all the time, and tell us, hey, we need something different, or this isn't working, or this needs to be fixed because of these things. And certainly I give full credence and faith, Turi, to the job that you and staff have done and will continue to do, but that seems to me like a million man-hours that just can't ever really exist. And I realize that we do, we only meet once a week or once a month, and we are up here for 2 to 3 hours on those times, but you know, I can definitely count more than a handful of times the public input that we've received has exceeded an hour on a given topic. You know, tonight we didn't receive one comment, thank you, Mr. Cobb, but we usually, and in particular when topics are hot, we will get a room full of people. And then I think about our joint board meetings where I've seen lines literally out the door before people are giving comments. So, you know, those sorts of things give me grave concern. But the second thing is, you know, I just have to ask, like, what are we doing here? Like, what are each one of us doing, taking time out of our day, preparing for these meetings? What are we going to be doing till May that's going to make a difference in providing any sort of advice? What are we going to do for the next 4 months? Are we going to make recommendations that eventually FAB takes up? You know, what's the point of our board at present now that this decision has been made? And what do we have to offer to City Council now that they've essentially rendered the point of our board moot in 4 months? I don't know, 2 months really. I mean, we got to apply to be on a new board. You know, it does feel, I think, it feels like a bit of a slap in the face in terms of all of the hours that each of us have spent in getting to the point of, I think, a pretty good point of expertise on the topics that we examine, on the topics that we consider and make recommendations on. So I'm not entirely sure what the point of being here now or next month or the month after is for us, if we're eventually just going to be consolidated or thrown away.
Megan's had her hand up.
Go ahead,
Thanks,
Megan.
Joanne. Yeah, this feels like a decision made, not one that we're debating.
Right.
But I have to say that I think this is really disappointing. I think this is honestly a pretty sad move for our entire community. And I think we're limiting the scope of involvement and input, and I only see that as a negative. I very much respect the counselors and staff's time, and that you guys put in a lot for that, but I don't think that we can cut out pieces that are important to the process. Like, discussion is important, different people being involved is important, and I'm trying not to be overly negative. I think this is a bad move.
And
I think I'll just chime in there too, since I did get switched back over. Thank you, Kathy, for getting me back online. I don't know what was going on with my phone. But yeah, I don't think anybody likes the idea of getting canceled, and that certainly is what this feels like. I did see that email that came through from Faith prior to the meeting, and there was some math in there. And I don't doubt by any stretch running my own business that when I see a reduction in workforce, a reduction in labor hours, expenditures, that I am going to save money. Absolutely, I'm going to save money. But let's just look at it from a car perspective. How many labor hours goes into a Bentley versus how many labor hours goes into a Ford Focus? And I think that the city is discrediting the amount of hours of expertise that not only they involve themselves, but how many people around this table have spent and dedicated their time with. And that level of expertise, that Bentley that they would have received at the end of the day, is now turned into a lower quality product with less discussion, less expertise, less community involvement to save money on a line item. Unless at the end of the day, somebody isn't being forthright. I'm trying to get to the end of this and saying, unless these advisory boards are literally the roadblock to getting stuff done. And if that's the case, then let's hear that. Let's hear that side of it. Because My volunteer time, like everybody else's, isn't, you know, a line item that the city should just consider getting reduced. That's my comment.
Thanks, David. Any other comments from members?
Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to say is, when I looked at the city organizational chart, you know, it's a kind of reverse pyramid. Citizens up top, you know, council, boards. And right now, it looks like the boards, based on our customers' input, council and staff, they're saying, yeah, this is taking too much time, we just don't have time for this. If I get rid of the boards, it's gonna simplify my life, and my life will be easier, and my life will be better. But I haven't heard the community complaining, the community, our customer, ultimately, that the boards aren't serving their function, they aren't improving the governance of this community. And to feel that, okay, does it take time on part of staff? Absolutely. Does it take time on part of council? Yes. And can you reduce the amount of time spent on that effort? Sure. But are you reducing the quality of the governance of the community in doing so? I do question that. I do question that. And I would say, you know, if the clients, if the actual public were complaining, saying, these boards are a waste of time, I would be fully like, okay, time to disband. But that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing council and staff saying, God, you take a lot of time to manage this. Fair enough. Not going to dismiss that. Are there ways to make that more efficient? Almost certainly. Okay, let's focus on that. But dismissing and being just canceled, like I say, as I said, I think I find just personally offensive. I actually find it really, I read that resolution and believe it. And this is evidence that no one else does, or at least council and staff do.
Yep, I think there should be more information about how city staff is claiming that their time is being misused. If they really are saying that their time is misused in dealing with the boards in whatever capacity that is, I think we should know more about that claim.
Let's
I
be
don't
careful
think,
on
yeah,
the terminology.
I don't think there's a claim of misuse of staff time, it's use of staff time,
Use of staff time.
yeah, not misuse.
Okay. So it's a use of staff time that is excessive, that they're saying. I'm trying to wrap my head around the justification for dissolving the boards, of course, and I believe that there was a claim made that the use of staff time was excessive in whatever capacity they were being used to interact with the boards or digest the board's feedback or digest the input and recommendations of the boards. It's obviously being filtered through you or through the documentation we've received here as to, you know, what that reasoning is. And I understand that staff members don't usually or don't always talk at meetings about these kinds of things, but in this event, it seems like the staff should be telling us in a more substantial and thorough way as to, you know, how that time is being used in a way that's excessive for this particular capacity.
So we were asked to take a look at the staff time that we were applying towards boards and commissions, and it wasn't just Parks and Rec, it was all boards and commissions, from community development to public works. Staff took a look at that. We calculated, you know, how many hours are we spending in meetings, how many hours are we preparing for meetings, how many hours are we reporting out on stuff, and we came up with that estimated, you know, 5,500 hours total for all staff. And then we looked at, you know, if we go to this new model, this is what we would project the reduction in staff time to be. So that it wasn't, we didn't use any terms like misuse or excessive. We were just asked to look at, what are we doing now, and are there ways to be a little bit more effective?
So one of the things, when you repeated that 5,500, one of the things that popped into my mind is a full-time person generally works about 2,080 hours a year if they're working 40 hours a week. And what that would calculate to is 2+ staff members, full-time. And this just came to my mind. It didn't even, I'm not arguing one way or the other. I'm just kind of, as it comes to my mind, free associating. And so that, I don't know what you pay that kind of a staff person who's doing that kind of work. I don't know. But if you look at what, for example, Tori and the other staff are doing, what is their job like? What do you want them to be doing? And then do you need to hire 2 people to facilitate the boards and commissions? I mean, this is another way of looking at it. I'm not, it just dawned on me that that's how you can kind of look at that. It's more than 2 people a year full-time doing that work.
I can run that calculation too and appreciate that perspective. And by no means am I, against more of an effective way of basically managing taxpayer dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's what this is coming to, then hey, this might be a better way of doing it. We don't always have to do the same thing over and over again. But I heard Terry say, kind of the word is like, hey, if somebody asks me to go find data, I'm going to be able to present the data. Kind of, with all due respect, however it needs to, whatever picture needs to be painted, it can be, you can find data to support your argument. I mean, we have an attorney in the room, so correct me if I'm wrong.
You have a finance major who, statistic-wise.
So we found data to support that, hey, we spend this many hours, it's equivalent to 2.5 full-time staff members, so on and so forth. But did anybody say that this data, this hours is worth it, is valuable time? And if that's not what was the song that was being sung, so to speak, during the presentation by the executive directors of these organizations, then that's the part that I think that I'd like to hear is like, just come out and tell us that there's a better, more effective use of staff's time than being on these boards and commissions. And that is why this has happened. Instead of, hey, we got asked, find the hours, and we did, and we presented. It's like, tell us if this board has been standing in the way of productivity and getting things done, because that's a better way for us to maybe, swallow this pill within our community that these boards are essentially going to be dissolved, and that those hours are more effective spent elsewhere. More effective running your day-to-day operations, I don't know. More effective in gathering information on the best use of taxpayer spend or prioritizations or, listening to public comment, then somebody just needs to kind of explain to me the real, don't quantify it. You can quantify it all day long, I've heard it, I've seen it. But just tell us that there is a better, more effective use of your time, and then maybe that's something that we can get behind. Because the final thought is because I think it's money well spent at this point. I think right now it's money well spent because you're getting that much extra hours. So for every hour that's being spent by staff, how many hours are being spent times 12 people on a board? I mean, did anybody take that to the next level and say, not for every hour spent that staff is sitting here on a board meeting, they're getting an additional 8 to 10 hours of volunteer time from people that are here in this room.
Really,
So
it's
where
more like-
else can you get a 10x spend
Yeah.
on 1 hour of labor?
Yeah, so I guess I don't know what are we just ranting? What are we trying to do?
Yes, we are.
Yeah. Tom, do you have anything you want to add to the conversation?
No, I understand all the points, and I could have a beer and bitch all night about these thoughts. I think we're beyond that.
Yeah.
And unless there is an action, Turi, I mean, Anthony, you asked, is there, or maybe Turi did, is there a way for the board to comment on this? But if it's past us, if the decision's made, now it's our obligation to understand it and to do our best job through to the end of this board, if it really is final at that point, and then carry on our contribution, if board members choose to, in the available, the available commissions and boards that remain, unless we want to, put up a fight. But I think we're beyond the fight. This has been going on for a couple of years, and council has spoken. So right or wrong, I think we have to accept that and do a good job to the end, and then the sun sets and we get re-involved if we choose to.
Well, as a board, we have the option of making a recommendation. However, I think there are some other questions for me. I'm wondering, do the master plans for our open space areas and for Parks and Recreation Department and the Natural Lands Department, don't those master plans mention the role of boards in making recommendations? And if so, does that just roll over into these new entities that you're saying are being created?
So let me step through a little bit through how the legal aspect of all of this works. I'm not presenting like a position on anything. I just for understanding. So a ballot is a vote is taken on a ballot. Then the ballot has some wording in it. For example, one of the wordings in it is that shall be overseen or managed by a board, for example. So what happens then is that council then has an ordinance or a resolution, and I never know exactly why it's an ordinance or a resolution versus the other, but that comes before it that delineates what this board does or what that board does.
And why?
And why, sometimes. Not always. I mean, ordinances could be very flexible. So, but those ordinances are subject to change at the will of council, as long as they conform to the language of what the ballot was that was voted on by the public. So I just want you to know that. So there is a process that has to happen right now, which is a legal, red tape process of creating new ordinances that change the structure of all the boards and commissions. And those have to go through an approval process, an actual vote by council. So they will have to go to a public meeting, they will have to be read twice, and then they will have to be voted on essentially twice. First adoption, second adoption of the ordinances by council. So that's kind of the process that has to happen. Is that your understanding also?
Well, and again, to your point, do I think, having read the resolution and the ballot and the ordinance and all the above, do I think you legally comply with the obligation to have a board if you've got a financial advisory board overseeing this? Yep, I think you're legally clean. I think what was sold to the community, the expectation of the community, is you'd have a board overseeing that function in a way that responded to the city's interest in it, whether it be Parks and Recreation or natural lands preservation or whatever it may be. And to say a financial oversight board is going to bring that level of dedication and focus to that area, I think is a bait and switch. I think it's misleading. I think the community would say, what? You're going to have some white men stroking their beards and saying, here's where the money will go, and that's going to satisfy my expectation when I voted on this tax to support Post? I don't think so. I think that's at best misleading, period.
Yeah, it seems that these final months of this board should have some time spent in transitioning to whatever this new form of governance is. I'm not sure what kind of transitioning we would do, but it seems like we would want to have some involvement in that.
Yeah, I just don't know. There's no set process for fab to be examining these things. There's no architecture to kind of lean on as to like, how do we feed or fodder into that? I have no idea what we're doing, really. We're just gonna-
Why are we meeting next month? Good question.
Yeah, if we make a recommendation on, I mean, obviously, we're receiving basically news updates to the remainder of this agenda, but if there's an action item next month, we're just kind of yelling at clouds right now.
Why would we not have any role in making a valid or useful recommendation in the final months ahead?
That's a valid point. I think it's a good question. You know, I don't know to what extent we are being tasked with any sort of transition. It sounds like it's all falling to staff. You know, we weren't really asked to be part of the conversation with city council on this topic. We did have some staff or a staff member come and do a presentation 4 months ago, and we let them know that we think that generally doesn't sound like a good idea for all the same reasons that we're talking about right now, and didn't really seem to do much good, so.
Mhm.
Well, I've got to admit, when I listened to the council meeting yesterday, you know, there seemed to be a general consensus, even among the planning and design related boards, you know, Board of Adjustment, et cetera, that they've been talked to and they said, yeah, we see the improved efficiency in combining ourselves into a single board. I don't see anybody saying that was problematic or that step had not been taken. I honestly feel that did not take place when it comes to natural lands, preservation, parks and rec, multimodal. I think it may have been mentioned that we're having a conversation, but we weren't part of it. And I think it's disappointing at best that this feels like you just got kicked out of the party and no one even told you.
Was there any community feedback received by city staff or city council that said that they thought that the boards were causing more financial burden on the city staff because of their involvement with the boards?
I don't know of any community input on that.
So I guess, Kim, what does city council see as the board's role
From today forward,
moving
yeah.
from today forward till,
Current boards,
current boards?
we did not discuss that.
And it seems like there's gonna probably be somewhat of a clean slate, starting in May, but, you know, we usually start our budgeting process this month, next month. We start examining capital improvement project rankings. We start looking at all of the things that need to be done. That process starts now, next month, but I mean, that's not the why, there's no point for us to be doing that. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Really just having a hard time grasping what we're being asked to do. We could come here and talk about Parks and Rec and listen to project updates, but then we aren't doing anything. We're gonna be providing advice to a council who's already moved on to the next project, which is their prerogative, for sure. But I'm really just struggling with that question, you know, what's the point of us being here?
I agree.
I'll make a motion to end the meeting at 6:46 PM.
We have a second?
I second Marty.
Yes, we'll call, do we want to open it for discussion? Anybody want to have a discussion about that?
I guess the question is, are we going to arrive here for the following meeting or not? I mean, or is this the end?
I mean,
Really? I mean, it's a fair question.
I think I would ask our executive chair and vice chair to meet with staff between now and then and determine whether or not an agenda is needed.
okay.
Anthony, I'd offer that this sounds like we're pouting a little bit and pulling the plug too fast. We have a few more agenda items, and I don't think that's the message that Kim should hear or take back, or Turi and our important staff should be that, we don't have our toys, and so we're gonna shut down the show. So, I'm gonna vote no against, stopping the meeting early.
Got it, thanks, Tom. Does anybody want to have any further discussion before I call to a vote? Go ahead and call to a vote. All those in favor of ending the meeting at 6:45, please say aye.
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 All those, so I think we've got David. Okay.
Yeah,
Matt. We got.
I wasn't sure if you both said no.
I don't think my vote counts.
No. I think, no, correct, yeah. Yep, your vote does not count. Sorry, I hadn't done the math yet. All those opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
Hey,
All right, looks like the nays have it, we'll continue on. However, I would say admirable show of defiance. David, I really appreciate
I'm glad
it.
it's in the, I'm glad it's in the minutes, David, so good on you on that one, but we're just too nice, okay?
Hopefully you did get my, email. I do have to leave at either between 7 and 7:30, so if the meeting does run over, which I suspect it will.
I think
I will need to leave.
we'll be able to move on pretty quickly. Nothing is, we've actually already gone through one of the items that is ahead of us, so.
Would you want council to listen to this portion of the meeting?
I think so, yeah.
How do you guys feel about that up there on the screen?
Yes, it's people made really good points, and I think council should hear them.
Okay, then I will recommend that they do so.
Thanks,
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
Well, I will actually ask, should we ask our chairman to send a letter to council saying we're concerned or
Yeah.
have misgivings about this
What
decision to cancel this and other boards?
I don't know if we have to send a letter since we've already kind of put all
So
of that
just,
onto
yeah,
the record.
let the auditor.
But I think it would be beneficial if I can just get a head nod on asking our council liaison to provide us some intelligence or direction on how to proceed for the coming months. Like what's the purpose at present? What sort of things are we actually gonna be doing, and what do you need us to do? Or envision us doing? I think it would be informative for everybody. Is everybody okay with that?
We're struggling with, should I show up next month? Yeah.
And I certainly am.
Yeah.
Well, we are still governed by the Robert's Rules of Order, so you could make a motion to make a recommendation to city council.
Well, what I'm talking about is just getting a general head nod to ask our liaison to provide that information or provide us a report next meeting. Or
Yeah, I've got to admit, I don't know if I don't want to disband, but if there's no reason to be here, then
Yeah.
why not? So I'm struggling with that, I'm just not sure.
Yeah, I'm definitely, I'm personally considering resignation because I just don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
I could be spending time with my family, so that's kind of what I view it. But I certainly am dedicated to this board. I've been dedicated and I want to see it through to the end, but I have no idea what's going on. So if we could get some details that like what this means and what our role is, if we're gonna be providing anything, or if we are just spinning our wheels, like, no point
Spin
to
my
it.
wheels at home, right?
Yeah, exactly. So is everybody okay with council liaison communicating with council to provide us an answer to that? Maybe.
Yes. Great
Can
idea.
Yes.
can it be, we're not trying to get out of something if there's something we can do to help the transition?
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, I'm certainly not trying to paint a black picture on that.
I know, but I think that's the tone of our conversation. Just my input.
Thanks for that clarification. Megan?
Okay.
All right, moving on to enhancements to the off-leash dog area, including tree plantings.
I'll actually let Scott take this and provide some information on the dog park area.
So my understanding is we've had a request to look into enhancements at the dog park area. It's been a number of years ago that we did look at doing some pressure fine gravel trails to help with the mud issue there. I think we got into some budget numbers in CIP and it kind of fell off the list and we haven't talked about it since then. The dog park, like you guys know, is the old tailing site and that was acquired from the state at the end of that process. Part of our agreement with the state is that everything still goes through Department of Energy or Colorado Public Health and Environment, just to make sure that if we're doing the excavation, that soil doesn't get put in a pile that then ends up in somebody's front yard or in the park or wherever. So everything we've done so far there has been very, one, minimal, and two, it's been specific to, we're putting a bench in. And so we put in an application that this is the exact location where the bench is going. It goes to the state, they review the old drawings and maps and then provide an okay that yes, we can do this, or no, this is not an acceptable location. So what I've reached out, email to the person we've worked with before saying, is there some way that somebody can talk to us kind of more big picture of what's acceptable, what's not, so that we can have some discussion on what our opportunities are or not there. So, the excavations for trees, that's gonna be a concern. Can we have some idea maybe where trees go, where they don't go? Can we irrigate is not even an option. If we get them down by the river where maybe they get into the water table, is that an option? We're trying to get a big picture idea of where we go next before we get into detail. So I don't know if that satisfies questions from kind of just the big picture of where we're at there. But.
And I can say, when I introduced the idea some months ago, I thought, I was coming at it from the angle of a community forest plan, saying,
Right.
I think planting trees almost as a carte blanche is a good thing. Okay, is there an opportunity to plant trees somewhere? Dog park was just a mention. Okay, is that a place? Maybe. Do I think it improves quality of life? I think so, my opinion. Does it work? Is it too complicated? Quite possibly. The idea was, are there places to plant trees on landscape the city controls where there aren't trees? And do I think it would improve the quality of life of this community to have some? Yeah. Okay, is this the right place? Is it over in Three Springs? Is it up on Durango Boards? I don't know. To me, I just want to invite that conversation and say, instead of having to be a street tree on a neighborhood, it could be in our parks infrastructure writ large.
And I think it's a great question and just kind of help get the ball rolling on it. And I thought that whole river corridor between Doubletree, 160 down to Santa Rita, in my mind's ripe for some cottonwood plantings, try to start pulling some of the elms out of there and doing something different through there, so.
Yeah, and we
Appreciate
are
that.
gonna be doing, we do have funding this year in our CIP to do a forest management update. So those are sorts of things that we should be able to address. But yeah, when we got this request, we were looking specifically at the dog.
Yeah, and again, I actually like the idea because it's kind of a hot, barren area when you've
Super
been
hot.
there. So a tree would be really delicious if you can get there from here. And I don't know if that's possible.
Follow up.
Okay.
I don't know if there's any way to categorize this as planting new bathrooms, but I don't know if that applies somewhere.
Pet bathrooms?
I'm not sure I understood what you just said.
That was a dog.
Is it a boys' bathroom or a pet
Dog
bathroom? I'm
show.
trying to understand, yeah. Touche.
When I look at the landscape at the off-leash dog area over by Smelter, I just see a lot of grass missing that probably used to be there because of all the dogs that are running around. And it seems like having some trees planted there could help with stabilizing the soil, you know what I mean? Like, without having grass and, that small type of flora on the landscape, it just seems like pretty unstable soil. So if we had some trees that could be dropping their leaves and their leaf litter on the landscape, just seems like that could help prevent erosion, help establish a.
And I know people throwing balls are gonna be hanging out in the shade of the tree, throwing the ball, letting the dog run into the sun and come back, thank you very much, that's how it'll happen.
Yeah, that
The
would make
mud
sense.
part is huge too,
Mhm.
the mud part, I mean,
Right.
the park's unusable
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
For sure. Thanks for the
Okay.
update. Any
Yeah.
further questions?
Capital improvement project updates, Schneider Park, the pickleball courts, we're getting close to having that out to bid, probably here in the next month. And then looking at construction for, hopefully get a contractor on board and start early summer on that. Lake Nighthorse, the entry station and decontamination station, probably a couple weeks behind that schedule, but generally the same, hoping to wrap up construction drawings, get that out to bid here in the next month, month and a half, a month, and then out to bid. I'm hoping to get that construction started early summer as well. 3 sections of Animas River Trail. Got proposal to purchasing today for renovation of the old asphalt section. So the one section is Santa Rita Park south to Nature's Oasis. The other is Santa Rita north to Doubletree. And then we included the section from Demon Bridge to 29th. We don't have construction budget for that planned until 24, but thought this gets us in a position that we can get that designed as well. So trying to group all 3 since they're just redesigns, should be pretty straightforward. But that puts us in a position that we're kind of wording it that we want to get one of them out as quick as we can with the consultant, give us a schedule. The next one, maybe by mid to end summer, would be ideal, and then have the one set up for 24 to go if we're ready for that. I think we, as we're putting the bids out for the engineering services, we also have requested just getting a letter of opinion. We've been looking at the 2 bridges and trying to get some letter of opinion on those, and that give us some direction of not doing a full, month-long study on what each of those bridges' capacities by me, but have a structural engineer look at those and say, yes, our initial take on this is that you've got another 30, 40, 50 years left of this bridge. It makes sense to replace the trail on either side, or if we're going to do all that other work, we should consider the bridge at the same time.
So we don't have any data at present about point of failure, prospect of failure,
No.
any of those things?
So you're talking Demon Bridge and what?
Demon Bridge and then the low bridge behind, or just below Santa Rita Park. So as you go underneath the highway from Santa Rita, and then there's the
On the way
pedestrian
down.
bridge just below.
Okay, I'm trying to-
What about the
So
bridge?
having those evaluated to make sure that they're
the
structural.
one that goes right next to the highway.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
yeah.
So one thing I'll just mention again, this is old news, but I don't know if the city has ever actively evaluated concrete, the types it uses, how porous they are, their longevity, but you're talking about a fair bit of concrete projects, and I always think if you're just pouring the same stuff you developed in 1980, one should at least revisit that. There's a shit ton of energy that goes into making concrete, and there's a lot of different blends that have come about over the previous, more recent decades. I think it just put it on the radar of, are there better substances, call it concrete, but concrete blends that, hell, are just a little more environmentally friendly. Maybe they're more porous, maybe they've got different lifestyle characteristics, but just keep it on the radar instead of doing the same RFP you've done for 25 years.
Is the one at Santa Rita, is that pillared or is that suspension? That bridge? I can't remember.
It's on pillars or abutments, yeah.
Couldn't think of it. It was
Yeah, it's
trying
got
to
pillars
imagine.
underneath it,
The other topic that's come up regarding trails are the width. Right now, we're a 10-foot standard. So that's something that we could potentially take a look at and maybe go into a 12-foot width and changing our standard.
So something that's been brought up for years that I think we missed the boat a long time ago, but is the fact that a lot of people would use a running trail
Adjacent to
alongside
the side.
of and the comment that was made by a staff person when I said that was, well, yeah, there's already running trails there. You can see that they've made them in the dirt when they run. And I'm like, oh God. Yeah, that's why you need a dedicated trail, because it would alleviate some of the conflicts, I think, on the trail itself if there was something like that.
Yeah, that's very much along that pressure relief valve concept that I said, create ways to allow different traffic to navigate in a way that just avoids conflict. It can be done,
Actually, that's great you brought that up. We had a work plan meeting with Durango Trails, and that is one thing that we are putting within the work plan is to create those offshoots and those opportunities to get off trail. So we're going to be starting to talk about that with
I know a lot of runners actually prefer soft surface as opposed to
Yeah,
concrete.
either
so,
gravel
yeah.
or otherwise,
And a lot of it's been the cross slope, trying to get the trail along riverbank, so like,
Yeah,
like
and
the
I don't think you do it
section.
everywhere.
So we do it
There's
where we
tons of
can.
issues, you know?
So, but the section south of Santa Rita Park, she feels like there's enough width and most of that to get a little bit of gravel on the side. The part that goes along the highway to the north,
Less so, yeah.
it just becomes a cost of, if we're going two more feet out, or we build, and how much wall do we have to
No,
build?
I
So,
totally understand.
yeah.
It's just, the one that I think of all the time is the one behind the high school,
Yes.
actually, that section right there, I think
Right.
about all the time.
People are on it all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, any other CIP updates?
We did meet with John Gilliland 2 weeks ago, and then again with the engineer this week, the project engineer. John's asking for more time. I think he's trying to figure out what's going on there. It's kind of in that position where he's asking city if what requirements there will be for a road or drive to access lower parcel for development, and kind of wants, I don't know what I'm doing, but I want an okay that whatever I do in the future is going to be acceptable. Community development, engineering, the city's not in a position to say, yeah, you have carte blanche, but then he doesn't want to be putting himself in a position where he has a lot of additional costs with retaining walls or road development. Where he's at now is trying to, this spring, as import material comes in, continue to get access road from the roundabout at Wilson Gulch Road to the pit. And depending on how much material he comes in, he thinks he should be able to get that. And then, but that still leaves, how does he get from there to the lower parcel long-term as a question mark. We did have some conversation of there are opportunities of looking at a temporary or a soft surface to make an initial connection, and how can we kind of keep it moving forward. And I think giving him a little bit of time this spring to see where he gets is where we're at right now, so.
Has there been any figuring out of solutions to the grade problem with the main entry to the main road?
From,
There
we
was
said
two,
Main Road.
two,
Yeah, there was
let's say
two
it's 10
steep,
degrees
yeah.
and they needed an 8, and so they're talking about
Yeah,
how
there
you
was like-
lengthen the road to make it fit whatever.
There was some announcement of like a $2 million improvement that needed to happen in order to fix grade, because it didn't meet county or city grade.
I
And so
recall
they
something
were
like
talking about how that was gonna be a huge issue, and I haven't heard anything since, so.
And I don't even know if it's fact, but I've read the same thing, so I'm aware of.
I think it was said to our board at some point. They were talking about how that's gonna be an issue. That they essentially, and I think it's that first hairpin,
From Highway 3 up, right?
yeah, highway pit 3 up.
On the trail?
No,
We're
on
talking
the
about
road.
roadway leaving from Highway 3 up to Durango Mesa Park.
Yeah, we were talking two different,
That's a different
we're
project.
talking two different things here. We're talking the trail
Yeah, so
to
this
Three
is
Springs.
Smart 160 East that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha, sorry.
Yeah.
We are making.
I'm
some
still not
progress.
caught up on what you're
Yeah,
asking about
so
though.
they
I
were
was
talking
talking
about
about-
Highway 3 up to Durango
Yeah,
Mesa
we were
Park.
talking about Durango
And you
Mesa.
were
Okay.
talking, what,
Yes,
Smart
yes.
160.
Sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I was, I thought I heard you say, never mind. We were talking about different
We're working
people.
on the road up to
When you
Durango
said
Mesa
John,
Park
my
as well,
mind
yes.
immediately went to, Mr. Katz. So I apologize.
Sorry.
Yes.
Well, and one
I don't
thing
know
I'll
why.
mention there that's unrelated, but it might be related, is I remember an ancient conversation talking about John Gilliland is gonna be essentially reclaiming his pit, I'll call it Pit South, and moving north to mine gravel further north. And I vaguely remember him saying, hey, I'd love to reclaim this as some kind of a community recreational asset, vice throwing down some grass seed. And so I thought, oh, that's an interesting opportunity for whatever, bike skills area, whatever it may be. And I have no idea if there's any traction to it, or if it's OBE, or if it's 10 years out, but I'd like to have it in the back of your mind, say, okay, there's a lot going on, and if they're moving north, could this become something vice grass seed on an open pit mine? And I'd like to think there's an option there, or at least something that gets explored.
And I think that's kind of where we came away from the last couple of meetings, is dusting off options we've been through, brainstorming where we're at, how is there other alternatives, and maybe it's not a 10-foot paved trail that happens in the next couple of years, but something that gets us connection. So I think continuing to
And again, so this is
brainstorm
separate
that
from
is
the
doing.
trail, it's the pit itself, but
Yeah.
in as much as it's under his watch, it might be part of the conversation, a bit large. Okay.
On the Durango Mesa Park.
I just jumped the gun. Sorry.
HDR has been hired by the foundation. They've been working with the city, and we are making some good progress on that road. I think we got it down to an 8% grade, and they've been working at all the elevations and things like that. So good progress on that. So
Cool.
And they've got the right of way for the emergency egress that's separate and distinct from that primary roadway, correct?
they did, yep, they did get that, and they have been working with the fire department to work on the grade of that road to try and improve that so that the fire apparatus can get up a little bit easier. So that has been in discussion as well. And
Since there's so much up there to burn.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Let's plant a tree and see if we can burn it, right, yeah, exactly.
And, you know, if the stars align, the hope is to start making improvements to that emergency access road this year.
Nice. All right, anything else on projects? We'll move to new business. We've got in for future discussion, dependent on need, I suppose. La Plata County multimodal plans, pressure release valves on assets. La Plata County Outdoor Recreation Department, Gem and Mineral Cup Facility at Brookside Park, and Chapman Hill additional usage opportunities. Does anybody want to add anything to that list? Or
For
would
the 2
like
months
to?
we have.
Yeah.
I would, depending on need, just want to let you know that Twin Buttes Development has reached out and had initial conversations with us about the potential to add some pickleball courts on some property down by Highway 160. So we've been having some initial discussions with them about feasibility and what that would mean.
Is that the Animas High School site, the old Animas High School site?
So there's a barn.
Oh, okay.
A site with a
So
barn.
actually by the entrance.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
The
Yeah.
Animas school
They've got
site,
2 down there, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I think they got one.
I was gonna
One.
be.
Okay, fair enough.
so the Animas school area is being designated as their commitment to workforce and affordable housing. So that's where that'll probably end up.
Okay, gotcha.
So that's actually Three Springs property?
Yes.
I actually didn't know that, okay.
So-
No, Twin
Twin
Buttes
Buttes,
property.
Excuse me, my mistake.
Sorry.
Yes, thank you.
I
Yeah,
do
no,
that all the time.
I did that one right too, yeah.
So we wanted to make you aware of that and just let you know that that could be a potential discussion.
Okay.
Which is not gonna influence at all anything at Schneider, true?
Correct.
Okay.
But I think it does play into discussions with Three Springs and where that goes. But so just throwing that out there that you know we were approached, we are evaluating, and it could be a board discussion if so needed.
Got it. All right, well, I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. It is 7:10 on February 8th. Next Parks and Rec Advisory Board meeting, we think, is gonna happen Wednesday, March 8th, 2023 at 5 o'clock. Appreciate you guys' time and closing comments. Each and every one of you have done a miraculous job in the positions that you've been charged with. It's been a pleasure serving alongside of you, regardless of what happens. So thank you so much for your time. I know it's appreciated by me.
I just realized I won't be here March 8th, and we gave the date to report.
I thought we changed that date, didn't we? Hold on, I don't think you did. We changed it, because I'm not gonna be here.
March
Got it in my
15th.
calendar.
Tom's not gonna be here.
Right, it's actually the 15th. Remember we did a little
Yeah.
flip.
It is on
Yeah.
15th, that is.
Yeah, we moved it to the 15th.
Yep.
Correction to the record, is going to maybe be on March 15th, 2023, at 5 o'clock.
Joanne, I don't know if you can do it now, I doubt it, but can you send me the
All right, thanks for
timestamp
attending.
for that? 6:23, so I can send it out to council. Yeah, that would be great. So probably 6:23 and 6:24, so they know the timeframe that they're. I'm sorry, say that, probably 6:23 and 6:24, so that I know the full beginning time. Oh, yes.